there's this idea that our lives aren't worth living, and that we would be better off if we weren't disabled. And I think when these things are talked about, if we need to cut money or whatever, well, the first thing is let's just cut all that stuff that we're doing for disabled people out, because their lives aren't as important. It's kind of the narrative of the conversation.
Welcome to the Props No More podcast, a production of the Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment and Disability Rights podcasts. This series highlights the forthcoming documentary Props No More, a global project challenging how people with disabilities have too often been used as props in film, television, and journalism. Both the film and this podcast spotlight authentic disability representation, accessible media practices, and the training of storytellers with disabilities across the world. In this first episode, we'll speak with Leah Smith, Director of Public Relations for the Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment, about why representation matters, how harmful portrayals shape public attitudes and self-image, and what Props No More is doing to push the conversation forward. In future episodes, we'll talk with filmmakers, advocates, and others directly connected to the Props No More documentary, offering a behind-the-scenes look at how this story is being told and the impact it aims to make.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Leah Smith, and I am the Director of Public Relations for the Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment, also known as GADIM.
Awesome. And this project is called Props No More. Can you tell us a little bit, first just about that title, and then kind of the idea behind the film?
Absolutely. So we're really excited to be launching Props No More. It's both a documentary and a platform, so you can check out our website at propsnomore.org. But it's really focusing on this idea of authentic disability representation, media skills, training, and making media accessible. So we're kind of combining all three of those into a full-blown project that we're hoping to, or that we are launching, and that we're hoping to tackle this problem.
Awesome. And could you just tell us, a little bit about what that idea of a prop is and why and how the documentary is pushing against that?
Yeah, so our Props No More is kind of one of those, we're hoping it catches your attention, right? Our goal was for it to really catch people's attention, especially when we're talking about representation of disabled people in the media. And I mean, I think for far too long, people with disabilities have been used as props in storytelling. Let's be real, disabled characters often exist solely to support the emotional journey or moral growth of a non-disabled character. And we really want to push this radical idea that disabled people can be portrayed as full, complex individuals with agency and purpose all on their own. And to be honest, the fact that this is a radical idea shows really how far we have to go.
Absolutely. And could you speak a little bit to maybe people that don't have disabilities, what kind of psychological effects that has on people with disabilities, watching all those representations? I mean, I'm thinking particularly of young kids seeing that, and then kind of what impact that has in seeing people with disabilities relegated to props or, supporting the journey of the main character, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think for one, so often our disabilities aren't represented. Maybe, to be honest, as a little person myself, it was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when I was growing up. That was kind of, or Oompa Loompas, and I just want to blank on the name of that, A Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Those were kind of my two, but so often, we hear from kids all the time with disabilities that say, I've never seen someone that looks like me on the media. And so they kind of have to go to the broader spectrum. So one, they're being erased completely, or when they are seeing, they're seeing, there's huge stereotypes and stigma that goes into play. Oftentimes, disabled people are the villains. Um, they're not usually the good guy, or and so all of these representations really not only shape how we view ourselves, but also public attitude. They only further fuel stigma and really erase disabled stories and what our lives really look like. Um, and oftentimes this is the only idea of what someone has about disability. And so if you're relying solely on what you know about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when I come in for a job interview, yeah, there's going to be some discrimination that happens, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, when you're talking about that, it gets me just thinking about the whole larger project of GADIM and the importance not only of representation within the stories, but then also informing that representation by filmmakers or creators, artists that are people with disabilities. Because if not, then it's going to be really easy for people to kind of, maybe even with the best intentions, to fall into tokenism or do things visually or however in the representation that falls into that the same bad patterns.
Absolutely. In the disability community, there's a phrase that people often say, "Nothing about us without us," and meaning don't talk about disability without us at the table, right? And the director or the executive director of Props No More has kind of shortened to that and says, "Nothing without us. Just include us. Be sure that we're at the table in all conversations, because disability really is a part of every conversation we're having." And I think that's especially true when it comes to representation in the media, because there's so much that maybe you don't even realize you're doing it. That's how stigma works. That's how implicit bias works, is you're not thinking about who you're leaving out of the table or the conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Do you want to just speak a little bit to how this project kind of evolved, like where the idea came from, how it snowballed into the big production that it is?
Yeah, so it actually started out as a documentary that we had a global team from the producers from Germany, a disabled producer, and they decided to come together and create a documentary. And so that's really where it started. And then it started snowballing into like a bigger platform and issue of we were like, let's have a documentary where we're talking about representation and getting media makers all together. And then it was like, from there, it just kind of was like the natural next step to be like, well, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to start addressing these really problems that we're having and these aren't just United States, these are across the globe. And I think that's one of the things that makes this project so cool, is that we're not just located here. We have like a truly global alliance from, I say from Omaha, Nebraska, all the way to, the usual suspects of LA and New York, but Africa and Germany and everywhere in between, and which I think is really cool to see, of this idea of disabled people really coming together. And while the problem may look slightly different in each place, it's still the same problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you, is it all right if we shift a little bit to your personal journey into the arts and this? So can you mentioned, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory as kind of, things that made a mark kind of on your consciousness. Is there a moment in your development, in your career, or maybe even before you really started your career, where you thought, this is something I'm passionate about? This, like, disability representation in the arts is something that I really want to devote a lot of energy and at least a portion of my career to really pursuing.
Absolutely. So like I said, as a kid, I remember watching those shows only because I wanted to see another little person, not because I loved Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but because I was like, I just need to see another little person doing what I do. I mean, not that I dance around, but you get it. So I was watching those shows and I kind of I was really lucky to then later join organizations for people of shorter stature, which kind of filled that need even more. And then as I got older, I would say probably high school, a little bit after, reality shows really started becoming a thing. And I started forming an opinion on those and really feeling like, I would say by my, mid 20s, I really felt like reality shows could be both really educational, but also be basically a way that people can attend freak shows and that circuses like they used to in the olden days in the privacy of their own homes. That it was like a way that people were getting that, like, look at people that are different than us, the same vibe that they were doing at circuses, but doing it just at home and showing their kids. And so it was like this two-sided, depending on the reality show, of what it was doing, what good was it doing, and what was it serving. And so then was in college and really decided to focus on communications and public relations as my major. And so I just started looking at these issues even more of like, what happens when, and what's the deciding factor if something is educational or if it's only serving to further stigma and discrimination and some of those things. And so, and where's the line? Where's the line of what things serve as? And, can we influence that on our end as disabled people, or is it purely on who's absorbing it, right? So I really just started looking at these questions, and then I went on to get a master's degree in public policy. And oftentimes people are like, public policy and public relations, but it really fed into one into the other because it was like these public policy was really, oftentimes people don't understand what public policy is about and how it helps us and how it doesn't. So being able to have the communications aspect of it to really explain how this is going to impact disabled people every day has been a huge, that's a lot of my career. And so then this project came up and I was like, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I love to do is talk about disability in the media and how that is impacting all of us. And like I said, there's good and there's bad, and we've come a long ways, but we still have a long ways to go.
Absolutely. And to help us understand, people listening understand, like, what have you found, and maybe the documentaries exploring this too, are like the barriers to entry for people with disabilities into being able to shape these narratives around authentic representation. Like, what are the barriers of entry, I guess, for the actual filmmakers, and then also what things are there to push against in actually getting the thing made?
That's a great question. So I think there's a couple of things that are kind of barriers between in solving this problem. And I think one of those is skills training and getting disabled people the skills they need to be able to do this. And, in today's world, media makers can be anybody. And so often someone, all they have to have is a phone and can record and make their own media. And so that's one of the things that we're really trying to push is like, okay, so what are the messages that we want to get out there of media makers? Also, how do we make them accessible for everyone? How does so that we're sure that we're talking to the audience that we want to talk to, right? And so we have some really cool projects going on with that. So I think there's that aspect of it, and then there's also, sadly, like what sells. And if you are a huge, organization company that's making a film like Wolf of Wall Street that has really bad portrayals, you're not really going to care what we say because that sells, right? And so really pushing this idea that um, to critically think about what you're viewing and to think critically about, if you decide to see that, that's one thing, but how does it shape your views on disability? And if you were to have, I think so often we hear, I mean, all the time, of parents that have, a newly disabled child, and they're like, the first thing they say is the only thing I've ever seen is, and they name a show with that type of disability in it. And that's what I mean when I say, when you watch it, are you thinking critically about what you're watching and what you're viewing? And is that the kind of world that we want to create for our next generation? So I don't know if that no small task, but those are kind of my two angles that I'm seeing.
Absolutely. No, that's really helpful. And I think that thinking critically piece is such an important piece of this, because there's ways in which negative representations can tell us a lot. And so that's a really important consciousness that we can bring to bear, which I'm sure is kind of and what comes up a lot in these circles of with people with disabilities speaking about their experience is this resistance to stories being inspiring. And can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've kind of spoken to the other side of, oftentimes they're the villain or the bad guy, right? But it seems to be there's no middle ground. It goes from that to the opposite side of being that disabled people live this really inspiring life. And that we see memes of a disabled person doing something, an everyday item like buying groceries or something. And then, or there's a common one that we see of an amputee running, and they say, "What's your excuse?" Of like, as though, that they're doing something really inspiring and that you must be able to do better than that as a non-disabled person. And so how does this play out? How it plays out is I go to the grocery store and I'm buying some milk and someone tells me I'm really inspiring and that they're so inspired to see me out and about. I can tell you that almost every disabled person I know has a story just like that of being told that. And we're not doing anything that inspiring. If we are doing something inspiring, then say that. But buying a gallon of milk isn't that inspiring, right? And so I think this idea of either we're really bad or we're like saints and we're doing just amazing things without much effort or something, or I think that's where the problem is that we're neither. We're humans living in just as everyone else is, doing everyday things just like everyone else and trying to get through this world. So yeah, I think that both are really problematic and can be really troublesome for our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially when you think about how in a lot of ways our society can be so segregated, where people without disabilities can find themselves very conveniently not interacting with a lot of people with disabilities. A lot of how they view disability is shaped through media. And so and then when they do, so it makes sense that this is kind of like a feedback loop where it's like, if they see inspiring people, or if they see these stories of inspiration or whatever, or villainy, then when they actually encounter someone with a disability in the real world, they're trained to kind of see through those filters. And so I could see how it could become really a vicious cycle.
It really is, because then it just keeps going. And so, I think some of the best new parent advice that I've heard people give is, if you just are born with, or you just have given birth, let's say, or have adopted a child with a disability, what should you do? And I heard someone say, go make friends with adults that have that same disability. And to speak to your comment about how often people are like, what you want, like, that's like this completely radical idea that you could go find adults with that same disability and learn something from them. And they're like, really? Or if you ask someone, how many disabled adults are in your life? Like, it's like this, like, what? You can do that? Whereas, like, I think that makes really cool friends. Like, I would go further and even say you probably have adults with disabilities in your life, but you won't acknowledge them. You won't acknowledge the disability. You're like acting like that doesn't exist as part of them. And, I and others hear that all the time of like, oh, I don't see you as a little person. Well, then what do you see me as? Like, that's who I am. And that's, you better, like, you should see me as that, because that influences every part of who I am. And so when we do that in friendships where we just like, oh, we're going to act like we don't see the difference, that's not doing anything for anybody, and only furthering stigma. And so, yeah, so just to speak to that loop of like, let's acknowledge it. Let's say the word. Let's like, disabled is not a bad word, and it only further helps all of us if we can and promote diversity and inclusion.
Right. 100%. If there's sort of if you could, I'm sure this is kind of a hard question to answer, but if you could kind of articulate, what are some key misconceptions people that don't have disabilities have about disability or people with disabilities? Like, what are some of those that you've encountered?
Oh, that's a good question. I think everything from, I must have, depending on what someone's religious background is, they might have think that my family committed some kind of sin, and that's how I happened. So like going to some of those religious beliefs of that, to like not understanding that I have a job, or that I have kids, or that I'm married, or that I like any of those things that are kind of typical things that you see people doing, that must be some kind of, that's really rare or really wild or really inspiring. Right. I remember, so I have 2 kids, and I remember being pregnant and that being like, it was so awkward going in public because people were like, it just blew people's minds to think that I had a baby inside of me, and that, and I don't want to know what they were thinking if I don't. But it was, I think some of those, and then I think job discrimination, everyone has a story about how they've been discriminated against in job situations, and asking for access needs. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like there's so many different ways that this comes to play that people don't, they just don't know how to address it. And it falls on us to be the ones to help them figure that out. And it's like we have to do a better job of doing this systemically rather than it being my job every time I walk out the door.
Absolutely. And this kind of pivots a little bit back into the documentary specifically, but what are some areas in terms of accessibility that, like, the media, the pieces of media themselves and how they're accessible to a broader audience of people with disabilities? What are some particular areas that we need to grow in as a culture and making sure that media is more accessible?
Yeah, so I think caption is a huge thing. Everything should be captioned in this day and age. Um, Audio description is kind of a newer, I guess, thing that things need to be audio described for the blind who can't, or low vision who can't see maybe what. There's so many things that happen on a screen that maybe you don't, that are part of telling the story of what's going on, right? And if you can't see those, that really impacts your ability to understand what's happening. So audio description jumps in to kind of give that loop. Um, I think, if we're talking about broadly, like Braille, and I mean, any kind of media needs to be ensuring that we're inclusive and providing all of those, whether it's captions, audio description, or any of those, like, and even like in, I'm thinking of Chance the Rapper right now, and his sign language interpreter, like, that's huge that people can also, that are deaf, get to experience going to see Chance the Rapper. So I think there's so many different ways that it can happen, but I think what's really important to note about that, I mean, about any of them, and we were having a conversation about this recently, people often think, well, you can just throw someone in there to do that, but it's an art. It's not like no one can just go up and rap a song. Like, that's, even if you know sign language, you can't just rap in, like, it takes an art and it's a skill that someone learns. And I think the same is true about audio description. And that, like, I remember taking an audio description class thinking, I need to be doing this for my media, and I need to, add this into my skill set. It's not so easy as just adding it in. Like, I'm not an audio describer. I'm not good at it. I'm not, it takes a real talent and a real, that I just don't have. And that's okay. But I say that to say that, like, you can't just throw it in there. It has to be very intentional. We need to put money towards it, of paying someone to be sure that they are doing the art and the skill of what we want them to do.
Absolutely. And I was thinking back earlier, and we talked a lot about how people are represented, at least how I was thinking about it when I was asking the questions, was in more narrative forms. But how would you describe, because I know the documentary touches on this, Props No More talks about news as well and journalism. And so how would you describe representation and the stories that are chosen, the editorial decisions that are made around news items that cover people with disabilities?
Well, that's a great question, and really goes to further broaden that conversation about media, right? And I think we see it so often. I mean, I'm thinking of just immediate news and what's on the headlines of mass shootings, and it always gets put on mental health and how that impacts people with mental health disabilities, when research shows that's not, people with mental health disabilities are not the ones that are, they're not the ones that are likely do this. But the two are so closely linked that that's immediately what someone says is, it must have been someone with a mental health disability. And so those comments and those links really further that stigmatization and often even why people don't want to be diagnosed with these things, even if their doctor says, you've been diagnosed with PTSD, let's say. They'll say things like, please don't put that on my record anywhere. I don't want anyone to know that. And the shame and the behind it, because they're like, I don't want people to think that I'm likely to be a mass shooter. And it's like, that's not how that goes. But the stigma is so strong we see that all the time in media and journalism. But then to further that, headlines are huge. And because oftentimes that's the first thing people grab is what did the headline say? And I can't tell you how many times I've been doing public relations and we'll meet up with a journalist and I'll say, but we have to review the headline before because they love, especially when talking about little people, big lives, little people, big heart, little people, whatever. Like they love that comparison of like put little and big in the same sentence and we're brilliant. That's so, but we see that with all kinds of disability and that whole inspirational aspect of it. Like headlines will read like disabled person running further than you ever have, or I don't know, something like it's like this idea of that we're accomplishing more than non-disabled people, and that's not okay. And so, I mean, I think there's so many ways that when we're the education aspect of our project of Props No More is really to like think about these things before, like it's not just the headline, it's that how those things are impacting people's lives and people's everyday interactions, their jobs, how they view themselves, their children, all these things.
No, it's a great answer. And you can see how that too is just so tied in with what we were talking about earlier and like the way depictions in movies and TV shows will feed into the news stories and vice versa and shape what stories are picked, because that's kind of shapes the filter that people are looking through. So it's like that's just going to be what they gravitate towards immediately when there's so much more there. And I was thinking too just about how do you feel in terms of disability, how the current political moment has been covered and the impacts of Medicare or Medicaid cuts and all these huge issues that are going to impact people with disabilities in pretty significant ways. How do you feel that the coverage has been up to this point?
It's terrible. I don't have to sugarcoat anything. I'm against these policies. I don't think it would be hard to know as a disability advocate that I would be against huge impacts on disabled people. But I think there's this idea that our lives aren't worth living and that we would be better off if we weren't disabled. And I think when these things are talked about, if we need to cut money or whatever, the first thing is let's just cut all that stuff that we're doing for disabled people out, because their lives aren't as important. It's kind of the narrative of the conversation. And I mean, even if we wanted to get in the nitty gritty of how quality of life is viewed within the healthcare system, and that's a real measure that doctors and physicians use of, what is the quality of life of this person when making triage decisions. We saw it often in 2020 with COVID of, do they need a ventilator? There's a famous case of Michael Hickson where he needed a ventilator, but he was quad and had a brain injury. And the doctor, his wife was recorded, the doctor saying was, he just doesn't have that good of a quality of life. Why would we give this to him? And she responds with, "What are you talking about? You know nothing about him." And what his life looks like. He has a great relationship with his kids, and he's very active, and but it was like this stereotype of what they thought it must mean to live with a disability. And I mean, I just in an Uber the other day, I heard my Uber driver was randomly telling me about an accident he was in. And he said, had they hit just 2 inches above that, it would have probably completely disabled me. And that would have been the end of that, because I'm not living my life like that. And I was like, wow, this got really deep, really fast of like, obviously he didn't know anything about me, but this idea that like you would rather be non-disabled than be alive, of it really impacts policy and how we're like. So of course, if policy decisions are being made, what are we relying on? We're relying on what we saw in the media, or how we view disability. And when those are so skewed to begin with, then of course those policy decisions are going to be skewed and not in line with how disabled people are actually living their lives.
Yeah, 100%. It really goes to show how intertwined the project behind, or the impetus behind Props No More and this project of GADIM more broadly influences real life material concerns of life and death, that we're seeing right now. And it's not just about, I mean, it is about making stories more accurate, and more accurate stories are more compelling stories, but the impact of that is so much deeper in terms of like how we actually treat each other and make sure that like people are getting the support that they need.
Right, absolutely.
Do you want to speak a little bit more broadly about GADIM and the kind of vision that GADIM represents, and what you all as a collective would like to see? Like, if you could have your wish list of what you'd like to see happen in 5 or 10 years in media, what would it look like?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think to answer that question, we want more better media representation across the board, whether we're talking journalism or in, movies. We want better media representation, but we want it to be nothing without us. We want it to be at the table, in the conversation being made, and we want more disabled people making media. We really want to, that's how you get better representation, is if we have more media makers, right? And so we have some really cool projects in the way. Like we have, we already have downloadable toolkits of recommendations for representation of disability on screen. And then, of course, a style guide on disability language. We're working on educational videos on how to create media that's accessible for everyone. And then, of course, our feature-length documentary that's in post-production now. So I feel like we have some really cool things that are coming out that are and that we're working on, that I feel like in 5 years we're going to be having at least a different conversation.
It's so exciting to see how much momentum that you all have. Like I'm just really excited to see how many projects you have underway, and it's a good energy to be around. So
absolutely.
Appreciate
it's really fun.
Yeah. And has that, I'm sure it's been kind of a fun energy for you to be around too. Like I don't know if you want to say anything to that. Like, have you been surprised by the amount of momentum you all have gotten? Like, it's a relatively young organization.
Yeah,
right?
It's really young, and I came on only probably 6 months ago. And, I was thinking this is going to be a fun little side thing that I was going to do. And it's been really fun. It's been like, it's a really, like you said, it's gaining so much momentum. It's every day we're working on like a new aspect. And that's one of the cool things about my job as public relations is I get to hear about all of them, and I get to be in different meetings to hear about what's going on. And so, we have like I said, a team in Germany, a team in um, LA, a team in like Nebraska, a team in, we just had a poll this week with Kenya. Like, it's just really cool to like be part of those conversations. We went to the UN on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities and had the opportunity to talk to a bunch of policy people that are like, doing disability policy across the globe. And that was really cool to hear, someone from, I don't know, the Netherlands talking about disability rights and what they look like in their country versus ours. And like, it's just, I think so often we think, oh, we're the United States, we've got it all figured out. We don't. We don't have it all figured out at all. And there's so many other countries that are doing such cool stuff that we really need to take note of and see how we can up our game, and how to encourage and how to build together for people that maybe aren't where we're at, but are still learning. And I think it's just a cool opportunity.
That's it for this episode of the Props No More podcast, a production of the Global Alliance for Disability in Media and Entertainment and Disability Rights podcasts. To learn more about the upcoming documentary, visit propsnomore.org, or to learn more about GADIM, visit GADIM.org. We look forward to sharing more voices from this exciting project. Thanks for tuning in.